I stood outside the elegant restaurant in downtown Toronto, clutching a carefully wrapped gift box. My heart pounded against my ribs as I smoothed down my dress, the same navy blue one I'd worn to every special occasion for the past 3 years. Inside were my twin daughters, celebrating their 25th birthday. 25 years. I could still remember holding them as newborns, one in each arm, promising I'd always be there for them. The hostess smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for the birthday party." The twins, Emma and Sophie, her expression shifted slightly. "And you are?" "Their mother." The walk to the private dining room felt endless. Through the glass doors, I could see them, my beautiful girls, laughing with their father Richard. The same man who'd walked out of our marriage 2 years ago, leaving me with nothing but legal papers and empty promises about staying civilized for the girls' sake. Emma saw me first. Her smile vanished instantly. "What are you doing here?" Sophie's voice was ice cold, cutting through the warm chatter of the celebration. "It's your birthday, sweetheart." "I brought gifts." My voice trailed off as I noticed the way everyone was staring at me, like I was an unwelcome stranger who'd wandered into their perfect evening. "We invited Dad, not you," Emma said, her arms crossed. The same arms I'd held when she cried over scraped knees and broken hearts. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Richard, expecting him to say something, anything. He just sat there with that smug expression I'd learned to recognize during our divorce proceedings. "But I'm your mother." The words came out as barely a whisper. "We know what you are," Sophie replied, her voice dripping with a disdain that seemed learned, practiced. "We don't want you here." The gift box slipped from my trembling hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Every eye in that room was on me, judging, dismissing, erasing 25 years of sacrifice and love. I turned and walked out, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to something I didn't yet understand. But as I pushed through those restaurant doors into the cold Toronto evening, something else stirred beneath the devastation. This wasn't over. This couldn't be how my story with my daughters ended. Before continuing, if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every day I'm bringing you stories of women who turn their deepest pain into a new good way of living their lives. Sitting in my empty apartment that night, surrounded by 25 years of memories, I tried to understand what had just happened. The silence felt suffocating. No birthday songs, no laughter echoing from the kitchen where I used to bake their favorite chocolate cake every year. I walked to the mantel where their photos still smiled back at me. Emma in her graduation cap, Sophie holding her first art prize, both pictures taken before everything changed. Before Richard decided our marriage wasn't worth saving and walked out with half of everything we'd built together. But it wasn't always like this. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. 27 years ago, I was a young nurse working night shifts at Toronto General Hospital. That's where I met Richard. Charming, ambitious, with his expensive suits and promises of a life where I wouldn't have to work myself to exhaustion. He swept me off my feet with dinner dates and weekend getaways to his family's cottage. When the twins arrived 2 years later, everything changed. Richard's pharmaceutical company was expanding, demanding longer hours, frequent travel. "Just until we get established," he'd say, kissing my forehead before another business trip. "You're so good with them. They need their mother." So I became everything. Mother, father, nurse, cook, homework helper, taxi driver, cheerleader. I'd work my hospital shifts, then come home to feed the babies, change diapers, rock them when they had nightmares. Richard would return from his trips with expensive gifts and apologies, promising things would get better once his next promotion came through. The promotion never seemed to be enough. I remember those early mornings when both girls had the flu, and I hadn't slept in 3 days. Emma was crying in one room, Sophie vomiting in another, and I was running between them with a fever myself. Richard was in Chicago, closing some important deal that couldn't wait. I called my sister Janet, barely holding back tears. "How do other mothers do this?" I whispered into the phone. "They have help," she said gently. "They have partners who actually partner." But I convinced myself this was temporary. Richard was building our future, our security. The long hours, the missed birthday parties, the empty seat at school plays. It was all leading somewhere better. When the girls turned 10, I suggested family counseling. Richard laughed it off. Therapy is for people with real problems. We're fine. You worry too much. But we weren't fine. Somewhere along the way, Richard had stopped seeing me as his wife and started seeing me as the help. Someone to manage the house, raise his children, and stay quiet about his increasingly frequent work dinners that stretched past midnight. The girls adored their father. He was the fun parent who showed up with surprise trips to Wonderland and expensive toys. I was the one who made them eat vegetables, do homework, and go to bed on time. I was the routine. He was the excitement. I started noticing small changes when they hit their teens. Comments that seemed innocent but cut deep. "Dad says you worry too much," Emma would say when I asked about her grades. "He says most women would be grateful to have a husband who works so hard." Sophie would roll her eyes when I reminded them about chores. "Dad doesn't make us do this stuff at the cottage. He says kids should be kids." Those weekend trips to the cottage became more frequent. Just Richard and the girls, building their special bond while I worked extra shifts to help pay for Sophie's art classes and Emma's university fund. They'd come back full of inside jokes and shared experiences I wasn't part of. "You're always working," Emma said one Sunday evening. "Dad says you care more about your patients than your own family." The words stung because part of me wondered if they were true. I was working more hours, but only because Richard's spending had increased while his contributions to household expenses had mysteriously decreased. Someone had to keep the lights on, the mortgage paid, food on the table. When I found out about the affair, his secretary, cliché as it sounds, I felt oddly relieved. Finally, an explanation for the distance, the late nights, the way he looked through me at the dinner table. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Richard hired an expensive lawyer while I scrambled to afford representation. He painted me as a workaholic who neglected her family, a woman so obsessed with her career that she couldn't see her own children slipping away. She was never home, he told the judge. Always at the hospital, always choosing patients over her daughters. The girls barely know her. It was a masterful lie wrapped in enough truth to be believable. Yes, I worked a lot. Yes, I missed some events. But I worked to support the family he was systematically abandoning. I missed events because I was earning money for their college funds while he was taking his secretary to expensive hotels. The judge awarded us joint custody, but the damage was already done. The girls had heard Richard's version of our marriage for months during the proceedings. According to him, I was the selfish career woman who put everyone else before her own children. He was the devoted father trying to protect them from my neglect. After the divorce, the weekend visits became shorter. The girls would arrive distant, leave earlier. Phone calls were brief, conversations stilted. They started spending more time at Richard's new downtown condo with his young girlfriend than in our family home. "They're just adjusting," my lawyer said. Give it time. But time only made things worse. Birthdays were spent separately. Christmas became a negotiation. Mother's Day cards stopped coming. When I asked about it, Emma shrugged. "We figured you'd be working anyway." Last year, for their 24th birthday, I wasn't invited at all. Richard texted that they wanted a small celebration. "Just immediate family," he wrote, as if I wasn't their mother who had carried them for 9 months, nursed them through every illness, celebrated every achievement. Now, sitting in my apartment after tonight's humiliation, I realized this had been building for years. The alienation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow, methodical campaign to erase me from my daughters' lives, one conversation at a time. The cruelest part was how logical it all seemed from the outside. A career-focused mother, a devoted father, 2 young women choosing the parent who made them feel valued and loved. Except that wasn't the truth. And tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I decided the truth mattered more than keeping the peace. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I couldn't face caring for other people's families when I was losing my own. Instead, I did something I should have done long ago. I Googled, "My adult children hate me after divorce." The search results changed everything. Parental alienation. The term jumped out from multiple articles and forum posts. Stories from mothers and fathers whose children had been systematically turned against them. The symptoms were all there. Sudden coldness from once loving children, unexplained hostility, refusing contact, echoing the other parent's complaints word for word. I read for hours, my coffee growing cold as story after story matched my experience. One article by Dr. Richard Gardner described 8 specific symptoms of parental alienation syndrome. Emma and Sophie exhibited every single one. By noon, I was sitting in the office of Margaret Walsh, a family lawyer who specialized in high-conflict custody cases. Her secretary had squeezed me in after I broke down on the phone, explaining I'd just been rejected by my own daughters at their birthday party. Margaret was in her early 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that had clearly seen too many broken families. Her office walls were lined with family law books and certificates, but what struck me was the small photo on her desk. A woman about my age embracing 2 young adults who looked happy to be there. "Tell me what happened," she said, sliding a box of tissues across her desk. I told her everything. The birthday party, the years of gradual distance, Richard's subtle undermining during the marriage, the way the girls seemed to have been coached with adult language and concepts during the divorce proceedings. Margaret took careful notes, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Have you ever heard of parental alienation?" she asked. "I just read about it this morning. But surely that's for younger children." Emma and Sophie are 25. Parental alienation can happen at any age, but it's particularly devastating when it starts in the teenage years and continues into adulthood. Margaret opened a thick file. "I've been practicing family law for 30 years. What you're describing follows a very specific pattern." She explained how alienating parents often wait until children are older to make their move. When the kids seem mature enough to choose sides, but are still psychologically vulnerable to manipulation. Richard had been patient, planting seeds for years before the divorce gave him the perfect opportunity to present himself as the victim. "The alienating parent typically presents themselves as the protector," Margaret continued. "They convince the children that the targeted parent is dangerous, unstable, or unloving. It's psychological abuse, but it's so subtle that even the children don't realize it's happening." She showed me a checklist of alienation behaviors: false allegations, limiting contact, creating loyalty conflicts, bad-mouthing the other parent, and something called boundary violations, making the children feel like they had to choose between parents. "Richard did all of this," I whispered, reading through the list. The business trips where he'd call constantly to check on the girls, the way he'd ask them about our private conversations, making them feel guilty for enjoying time with me. And during the divorce, he painted me as a workaholic who cared more about my patients than my family. The girls started repeating these exact phrases. "I thought they were just processing the divorce, but they were being coached." Margaret's expression was grim. The most insidious part is that the alienating parent often believes their own narrative. Richard likely convinced himself he was protecting the girls from you. My hands shook as the pieces fell into place. What can I do? They're adults now. They've chosen him. "That's what makes adult alienation so complex," Margaret said. "But it's not hopeless. I want to refer you to Dr. James Peterson. He's a child psychologist who specializes in alienation cases. Even with adult children, understanding the psychological patterns can help us build a case." 3 days later, I was sitting across from Dr. Peterson, a thoughtful man in his mid-40s who spoke with quiet authority. His office was warm and comfortable, filled with books on family psychology and childhood development. "Parental alienation is a form of emotional abuse," he explained after I'd shared my story. "The alienating parent essentially recruits the children as allies in their war against the other parent. It's particularly effective because the children believe they're making their own choices." He showed me research studies, brain scans showing how manipulation affects neural pathways, case studies of adult children who'd reconciled with targeted parents once they understood what had happened to them. "The good news is that the effects aren't always permanent," Dr. Peterson said. "Adult children have been known to recognize the manipulation and rebuild relationships with the targeted parent. But it requires intervention." "What kind of intervention?" "Legal pressure sometimes, court-ordered therapy. Most importantly, exposure to the truth about what happened. Alienated children live in a carefully constructed false reality. Once cracks appear in that reality, they often start questioning everything they've been told." I left his office with a notebook full of information and, for the first time in months, a spark of hope. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since the divorce. I went through old family documents stored in my basement. Bank statements, credit card bills, phone records, emails. I was looking for evidence of Richard's systematic campaign against me. I found more than I expected. In a box of old electronics, I discovered my previous phone, the one I'd replaced after dropping it in the hospital parking lot last year. On impulse, I plugged it in to see if it still worked. It did, and it contained 2 years' worth of voicemails I'd forgotten about. I scrolled through them with growing horror. Message after message from Richard, some friendly on the surface, but laced with subtle undermining. The girls mentioned you missed Emma's art show again. They seemed pretty hurt. Sophie said you've been working a lot of overtime. Are you sure you're prioritizing the right things? But it was the messages from the girls themselves that broke my heart. Early voicemails, from right after the divorce, where they sounded confused and sad. Mom, Dad said you might not want to talk to us because you're starting a new life. Is that true? Emma's voice so young and uncertain. Mom, why didn't you fight for us in court? Dad says you told the judge you didn't want custody. Sophie crying. I had never received these calls. Richard must have told them I wasn't answering, that I was too busy or too selfish to call them back. Meanwhile, he was building his narrative of abandonment. The cruelest messages were from about a year ago. The girls' voices had changed, colder, more detached. We're calling because Dad said we should give you one more chance. If you really cared, you'd prove it. I had no idea they'd been calling. I had no idea they'd needed me to prove anything. Richard had orchestrated the entire breakdown of our relationship while making them believe I was the one walking away. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories from powerful women that touch the heart of all of us. The next morning, I called Margaret with the voicemails. Her response was immediate. This is exactly what we need. This shows clear evidence of systematic alienation. Richard created a false narrative and used the children's confusion against you. We spent the next week building a case. Margaret connected me with other experts who could analyze the voicemails for psychological manipulation patterns. Dr. Peterson prepared a report detailing how the girls' language had shifted over time, showing clear signs of coached responses. But the most important discovery came from an unexpected source. Janet, my sister, called on Friday evening. I found something you need to see, she said urgently. Remember when Emma stayed with me for 2 weeks last summer when Richard went to that conference? Of course, she seemed distant the whole time. She left her laptop here by accident. I've been meaning to return it, but she never asked for it. Today I opened it to find her contact information and... Janet paused. There are email chains between her and Richard. Dozens of them, and they're not normal father-daughter communications. That night, Janet forwarded me screenshots that made my blood run cold. Emails where Richard systematically fed Emma talking points about my selfishness and abandonment. Messages coaching her on what to say if I tried to manipulate her into spending time with me. Most damning was an email chain from 2 months before the birthday party. Remember, girls, your mother will probably try to insert herself into your birthday celebration. She's always been attention-seeking. You don't have to include her just because she gave birth to you. You've moved beyond that kind of obligation. Emma's response. We already decided we're not inviting her. She'll just make it about her, like always. Richard's reply. That's very mature of you both. You're protecting your special day from unnecessary drama. The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Richard had convinced my daughters that excluding me was an act of maturity and self-protection. He'd made them feel empowered by rejecting their own mother. But now I had proof. Documentation of a years-long campaign to destroy the relationship between me and my children. Evidence that could change everything. For the first time since that horrible birthday party, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt righteously angry, and I was ready to fight back. Armed with evidence that could expose 25 years of systematic manipulation, I made a decision that terrified and empowered me in equal measure. I was going to confront Richard directly. But first, Margaret insisted we needed a strategy. Going in emotionally unprepared will only give him ammunition, she warned during our emergency meeting. Alienating parents are master manipulators. He'll try to turn your anger against you, make you look unstable. Dr. Peterson agreed. The goal isn't to get Richard to admit wrongdoing. He'll never do that. The goal is to gather more evidence and create opportunities for the girls to hear the truth from a neutral source. We planned carefully. Margaret would file a formal complaint with the family court, requesting an emergency hearing based on new evidence of ongoing parental alienation. Dr. Peterson would serve as our expert witness, explaining how the emails and voicemails demonstrated a textbook case of systematic psychological manipulation. But I needed to try one more time to reach my daughters directly. The confrontation began with a simple email I sent to both Emma and Sophie on a Tuesday morning. I kept it brief, factual, and impossible to ignore. I've discovered evidence that explains why our relationship changed so dramatically after the divorce. I love you both more than you know. Please give me 1 hour to share what I've found. Your father has been lying to you about me for years. Sophie's response came within an hour. We don't want to hear your lies and manipulation tactics. Dad warned us you might try something like this. Emma's response was even harsher. Stop trying to destroy our family. We're happy without you. Reading their words felt like being stabbed, but Margaret pointed out something crucial. Look at the language. Manipulation tactics. Destroy our family. These aren't their authentic voices. They're parroting Richard's script. The formal legal process moved faster than expected. Within 2 weeks, we were sitting in family court before Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman in her 50s known for her no-nonsense approach to high-conflict custody cases. Richard arrived with his expensive attorney, looking confident and composed in his tailored suit. The girls flanked him like bodyguards, their expressions cold and defiant when they looked at me. Margaret began by presenting the evidence methodically, the voicemails showing Richard's systematic undermining, the emails coaching the girls on how to reject me, bank records proving I'd been the primary financial provider while he built his narrative of abandonment. Your Honor, Margaret stated, this case represents one of the most calculated campaigns of parental alienation I've encountered in 30 years of practice. The respondent has systematically poisoned these young women against their mother, using classic manipulation techniques to rewrite history. Richard's attorney objected immediately. These are cherry-picked communications taken out of context. My client has been protecting his daughters from a woman who chose her career over her family. But when Dr. Peterson took the stand, everything changed. Parental alienation, he explained to the court, involves 8 specific symptoms. I've reviewed extensive documentation in this case, and these young women exhibit every single indicator. He described how alienated children often believe they're making independent choices when they're actually responding to systematic programming, how they use adult language to describe the targeted parent, how they show no ambivalence, only pure hatred for someone they once loved. Most tellingly, Dr. Peterson continued, alienated children cannot provide specific examples of the targeted parent's supposed wrongdoing. When pressed for details, they resort to vague accusations or repeat phrases they've been taught. Judge Morrison looked at Emma and Sophie. I'd like to hear from the young women directly. Can you tell me specifically why you don't want a relationship with your mother? Emma stood first, her voice shaking with rehearsed anger. She abandoned us. She cared more about her patients than her own children. She was never there when we needed her. Can you give me a specific example? Judge Morrison asked gently. Emma faltered. She was always working, always choosing other people over us. But can you remember a specific incident? A particular time when you needed her and she wasn't there? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Sophie jumped in to help her sister. She missed my art show in grade 10. Just that one show? The judge pressed. Well, no, but she missed important things. Dad says she never prioritized us. Judge Morrison's expression grew stern. I notice you keep saying, Dad says. What do you remember from your own experience? For the first time, cracks appeared in their rehearsed composure. Emma's voice grew uncertain. We remember her being gone a lot. Dr. Peterson had prepared me for this moment. Alienated children often have trouble accessing authentic memories because they've been trained to suppress positive experiences with the targeted parent. It was my turn to speak. I stood slowly, my legs shaking but my voice steady. Your Honor, I worked night shifts so I could be home when they got from school. I attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every graduation. I have the photos, the programs, the certificates. I looked directly at my daughters for the first time in months. Emma, I was there when you cried over your first heartbreak. I held you for 3 hours while you sobbed about Jason Miller breaking up with you before prom. Sophie, I drove you to art class every Saturday for 6 years, even when I'd just finished a double shift at the hospital. Emma's mask slipped slightly. I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. I have videos of your birthday parties, your Christmas mornings, our summer camping trips to Algonquin Park. Hours of footage of us laughing together, being a family. Your father wasn't in those videos because he was usually too busy to join us. Sophie's face was crumbling. That's not... Dad said you... What did he say, sweetheart? I asked gently. He said you resented us, that you only had kids because he wanted them. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Richard's attorney looked uncomfortable. I felt tears streaming down my face, but my voice remained strong. I tried for 3 years to get pregnant. I miscarried twice before you girls were born. You were the greatest joy of my entire life. Judge Morrison turned to Richard. Mr. Patterson, I'd like to hear your response to these allegations. Richard stood, his composure finally showing cracks. Your Honor, my ex-wife is clearly attempting to manipulate this court just as she manipulated our children. These recordings and emails are taken completely out of context. Then provide the context, Judge Morrison said sharply. Richard's rehearsed confidence evaporated. I was simply trying to help my daughters understand why their mother was behaving so erratically after our divorce. By telling them she didn't want them? By helping them process her rejection. What rejection? Margaret interjected. The evidence shows my client never rejected these children. She was systematically excluded from their lives. The judge reviewed the printed emails again, her expression growing darker. Mr. Patterson, this email here says, remember, girls, your mother will probably try to insert herself into your birthday celebration. She's always been attention-seeking. Richard's face flushed red. I was preparing them for potential manipulation. Or, Judge Morrison said icily, you were manufacturing a reason to exclude their mother from their birthday party. This email is dated 2 months before the event. You were planning to exclude her long in advance. The moment of truth came when Judge Morrison played one of the recovered voicemails in open court. Emma's 14-year-old voice, confused and heartbroken. Mom, Dad said you might not want to talk to us because you're starting a new life. Is that true? Emma gasped audibly. I remember making that call. You never called me back. Because I never received it, I said softly. I would never ignore you calling for me. Sophie was crying now, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in years. But Dad said, he said you told him you needed space from us. I never said that. I would never say that. Richard's attorney was frantically whispering in his ear, but Richard himself had gone pale. The carefully constructed narrative he'd spent years building was collapsing in real time. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Mr. Patterson, what I'm seeing here is a systematic campaign to destroy these children's relationship with their mother. You've used their natural confusion during the divorce to poison them against her. This is psychological abuse. Your Honor, I object to that characterization, Richard's attorney stammered. Objection noted and overruled. Judge Morrison turned to Emma and Sophie. Young ladies, I'm ordering immediate family therapy for all 3 of you. Dr. Peterson will oversee the process. You've been the victims of a serious form of emotional manipulation, and you deserve the chance to rebuild an authentic relationship with your mother. Richard stood abruptly. This is absurd. My daughters are adults. You can't force them into therapy. I can and I am, Judge Morrison replied firmly. I'm also ordering a full investigation into Mr. Patterson's behavior and considering whether supervised visitation is necessary to prevent further manipulation. The gavel came down, with a sound like thunder. As we left the courtroom, Emma touched my arm tentatively. Mom? Her voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the angry young woman who'd rejected me at the restaurant. Yes, sweetheart. I think I remember some things differently than I thought. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was the first crack in the wall that Richard had built between us. And for the first time in 2 years, that was enough to give me hope. 6 months after that life-changing court hearing, I sat in Dr. Peterson's office with Emma and Sophie for what would be our final mandatory therapy session. The women sitting across from me bore little resemblance to the cold, distant strangers who had rejected me at their birthday party. The healing hadn't been immediate or easy. Those first few therapy sessions were brutal. Emma and Sophie arrived angry and defensive, convinced they were being forced to participate in some elaborate manipulation. They'd been so thoroughly programmed to distrust me that every word I spoke was filtered through years of Richard's poisonous narrative. But Dr. Peterson was patient and skilled. He didn't attack their beliefs directly. Instead, he asked questions that forced them to examine their own memories. Can you remember a specific time when your mother chose work over you? What was she like when you were very young, before the divorce? Slowly, cracks began to appear in the false reality Richard had constructed. The breakthrough came during our 4th session. Dr. Peterson had asked Emma to describe her earliest memory of me. She started with the usual script: distant, always working, never available. But then her voice faltered. "Actually," she said quietly, "I remember you reading to us every night. You did all the voices for different characters. Sophie always wanted Goodnight Moon, but I preferred Where the Wild Things Are." Sophie looked startled. I had forgotten about story time. "You never missed a night," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with the memory. "Even when you came home late from the hospital, you'd still come to our room and read to us." That was the moment the dam broke. Authentic memories began flooding back, pushing through years of programmed responses. They remembered camping trips where I taught them to build fires and identify constellations. They remembered me staying up all night when they were sick, checking their temperatures and bringing them soup. They remembered birthday parties where I made elaborate themed cakes from scratch because store-bought wasn't good enough for my girls. "But Dad said," Sophie started, then stopped. "Dad said you resented us. What do you think?" Dr. Peterson asked gently. "Based on your actual memories, not what you were told?" The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in years, they were accessing their own experiences instead of Richard's interpretation of them. Emma was the first to break. I think we were lied to." The legal aftermath was swift and severe. Judge Morrison's final ruling was scathing in its condemnation of Richard's behavior. She found him guilty of systematic parental alienation and emotional abuse of his children. His visitation rights were suspended pending completion of court-ordered therapy, and he was required to pay for all of our family counseling sessions. More importantly, the court ordered a comprehensive investigation into Richard's parental fitness. The scrutiny revealed a pattern of manipulation that extended beyond just alienating me. He'd been using the girls as emotional confidants during the marriage, sharing inappropriate adult concerns and systematically undermining their trust in me. "This behavior represents a fundamental betrayal of the parental role," Judge Morrison stated in her final order. "Mr. Patterson has prioritized his own emotional needs and desire for revenge over his children's psychological well-being." Richard's response was predictably narcissistic. He hired a new lawyer and appealed the decision, claiming he was the victim of a biased court system. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The appeal was dismissed, and he was ordered to pay our legal fees. The twins' recovery was more complex than any legal resolution. Adult children who've been alienated carry deep shame about their behavior toward the targeted parent. Emma and Sophie struggled with guilt over the years of cruelty, the missed opportunities, the birthday party rejection that had started this whole journey. "How can you forgive us?" Sophie asked during one of our private conversations. "We were so horrible to you." "Because you were victims too," I told her. "Your father manipulated children's natural love and loyalty against me. You responded exactly as he programmed you to respond." But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. The lost years couldn't be recovered. The trust we'd once shared had to be rebuilt from scratch. Some days were good. We'd have lunch together and laugh like we used to. Other days were hard, when old programming would surface and they'd suddenly grow cold and distant before catching themselves. Emma decided to pursue her own therapy to work through the trauma of discovering she'd been systematically lied to about her childhood. "I feel like I don't know what's real anymore," she confided. "If Dad could lie about something so fundamental, what else did he lie about?" Sophie channeled her healing into art. She created a series of paintings depicting fractured family relationships and the slow process of reassembly. One piece, which she titled Mother's Hands, showed my hands reaching through broken glass. She gave it to me for Christmas, our first Christmas together in 3 years. The relationship with Richard remained complicated for the girls. They still loved him, despite everything. But they now understood that love could coexist with accountability. Emma established strict boundaries. She would see him, but only in public places, and any negative comments about me would end the visit immediately. Sophie chose to maintain minimal contact. "I need more time," she told me. "I'm not ready to pretend everything is normal with him." I supported both of their choices. Part of healing from parental alienation is recognizing that everyone processes trauma differently. As for me, the victory was bittersweet. I had my daughters back, but I'd lost years of their lives. I missed their college graduations, their first serious relationships, career milestones. I wasn't there for Emma's struggle with anxiety or Sophie's fight to get her art into galleries. But I learned that healing isn't about recovering what was lost. It's about building something new from what remains. On Emma and Sophie's 26th birthday, I received a text that made me cry happy tears. "Mom, would you like to plan our birthday party this year? We'd like you to be in charge of everything. Just the 3 of us, like old times." I spent weeks planning the perfect celebration. I made their favorite chocolate cake from scratch, decorated with photos from our camping trips and family adventures. I read them excerpts from journals I'd kept during their childhood, pages filled with proud moments and deep love that Richard had tried to erase from their memories. "Why did you keep fighting for us?" Emma asked as we looked through old photo albums. "Because you're my daughters," I said simply. And nothing, no manipulation, no lies, no court proceedings, could ever change that truth. Love, I learned, isn't something that can be permanently destroyed by alienation. It can be buried, distorted, and hidden. But authentic love endures. It waits patiently for the moment when truth finally breaks through the lies. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, you get the chance to rebuild what was broken into something even stronger than before. If this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. I'm sure you'll be surprised by this new emotional and heartbreaking story I have right here to tell you.